Most of us are familiar with the golden rule. I at least hope most of us are. And the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. It's this idea of, you know, when you go to make a decision about something is right or wrong, you should, or, you know, you go to do something, you should really think about others and try to do what you would like for somebody to do to you. If your car breaks down at the side of the road and, you know, you can't figure out how to change the tire, you would like for somebody to stop and help you. So when you see somebody at the side of the road with their tire, you know, you would go, I should probably stop and just see if I can be of any service or help. That, you know, if you were a person who'd, you know, just fallen down, you know, you would like for somebody to stop and say, hey, are you okay? And that's what you should do if you see somebody trip and fall down, even if you don't know them. And so the idea is to think beyond yourself, to be empathetic. Now, what happens is what makes that an interesting thing is that the Western tradition that, you know, in Plato, in Christianity, in Islam, in Judaism, all of these religions, all of these groups that are Western religions, Western groups, all have forms of the golden rule. And all forms of the golden rule, although stated slightly differently, a few words different here or there, all fall into the category of saying, do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. And so it's basically asking you to make decisions in a positive manner that will benefit others. What's interesting is that in the Eastern traditions, that over in Asia, China, Japan, etc., that Buddhism and Confucianism and a lot of the Eastern traditions also have a golden rule. But their golden rule is actually different, and each one's a little bit stated a little bit differently, but they're all basically use the basic way of describing it would be, do not do to others what you wouldn't want them to do to you. In this regard, it's what we would call a negative version of the golden rule. Instead of telling you what you should be doing, it's being negative and telling you what you shouldn't be doing. And so it's saying, don't do things that you wouldn't want done to you. Now, why is this at all interesting? Well, it's interesting because the Western tradition has these rules. And while, you know, you have like Jesus who states it, and Muhammad who states it, and Plato who stated it, that all of them probably had heard this rule because it was common folklore. It was common way of talking. People would say, do unto others as you'd have them do unto yourself. That was just, you know, it was a cultural rule. And so that got passed along. And then when it would get written down or codified in some way, that we could see it all in that same very similar vein. It got written down a little bit differently, but everybody had heard it the same way because it was a cultural rule. But the East didn't have access at that time. There weren't a lot of inroads of communication between, you know, Eastern traditions and Western traditions. But yet, those cultures developed a rule which was a negative version of the golden rule, which is don't do unto others as you wouldn't have them do unto you. Don't do to others what you don't want done to you. And what's interesting is every one of them in the Eastern tradition manifests itself in that negative regard. And so that suggests that there was some cultural sharing of those rules. Now, why is that all important? Because what it suggests that almost simultaneously, the Western traditions developed a positive golden rule, and the Eastern traditions developed a negative version of the golden rule. But yet the golden rule developed in both societies, and yet that you can't find a link between them. These were almost rules that came out independently, which suggests that the golden rule may be some underlying moral truth, that the idea of empathy towards others, the idea of helping others in need, the idea of don't do something if you don't want it done to you. You know, if you don't want to be hit, don't go hitting people. If you want people to be nice to you, you need to be nice to other people. That these were rules that are somehow innate within human nature. And both societies, not just societies, both hemispheres independently develop this because there's something innate, there's some truth that's underlying about empathy. That just as, you know, as far as truth and moral claims, that, you know, just as if I hit my hand with a hammer, it's going to hurt, right? That, you know, that there is a sense in which, you know, you need to protect your hands. You need to do this, you need to do that. That there's also a rule of be empathetic. That empathy is a moralizable, universal claim that we need to take note of. Now, a philosopher by the name of James Rachels, who also, you know, did study some anthropology, basically looked at and he said there were three underlying rules that all cultures accept. And the first one is take care of your young. The second one is do not lie to members of your own group. And the fourth one is do not kill members of your own group. So the three rules are take care of your children, don't lie, and don't kill, specifically to your own group. You know, as far as, you know, lying and killing people that are of other tribes, that's fine. But the case is he says there are those three underlying rules. He doesn't say the golden rule, he just has the other three. But what he suggests is that no matter what culture you go to, if you go to the most backwoods tribal culture in the world that, you know, has this paranoia that Ruth Benedict talks about, that if you go there and you accept that you would still find that they still adhere to these rules of take care of your young, don't lie, and don't kill your own. And he says what happens is they may interpret those rules differently, that the conditions on the ground, that, you know, just as you get into the one acculturating group that becomes polygamous and, you know, becomes polygamous and a brute, brawn, you know, oriented, we're going to go out and fight and take care of our own, you know, that kind of culture. That even while you have that on the one hand, that on the other hand, you have this group that says, you know, that's more open-minded, that's more, you know, about, you know, guys that are funny and, you know, can tell jokes and are nurturing and caring, that they're attractive, that they have just simply adapted the culture in which they're in. But the idea that, you know, one should provide for their family, take care of their children, or the fact that one should be honest, are still rules that permeate within it. They just have interpreted it differently because of the cultural and environmental differences. And so what Rachel suggests is, he suggests there are these underlying rules. There are universal moral truths, but they're interpreted differently. We can't judge everybody and say, oh, well, you have to do it this way, because they have different environmental factors. And so, for example, you know, if you live in modern American society in New York City or Chicago or St. Louis, you know, you live in an urban center, you probably will have a different view of what is right or wrong than somebody who lives in, you know, a cornfield, you know, here in Central Illinois. That you may have very different ethical views based upon the different situations you're in. And so what we do is we have different interpretations. But the idea is that there is still an underlying moral truth. They just get interpreted differently. And so while we may want to have a universal moral rule, that while we may accept relativism, we may accept that different groups have different views, we can still have discourse between them. We can still say, no, that is not a very moral way to behave, because you are not adhering to the underlying rules. I know your environment's different, but you know what? You could overcome that if you really were going to adhere to this rule of take care of your young, of don't lie, of don't kill. And we can judge other cultures because of this. And so there is universalizability, there is universal rules, it's just they're interpreted differently. But it allows for us to have discourse from culture to culture.